Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
Lovely morning. Horrible news, isn't it, that we have about 1 million species about ready to go extinct. I think we can have some impact on that in what we do in our own gardens. The topic, Highlights of May, is because there are two things that are really hard for me. Come up with a title months in advance and decide what to fix for dinner that night. But as always, feel free to ask questions as we go along. I try to say this every time I start a class or a tour. I always feel that if you have a specific question, the answer to that question might be the information of most use to you when you go home. We're going to go a few steps this way, and then we're going to backtrack and go over that way. But we have a dying tree to talk about. The tree is Zelkova sinensis, the sort of the Chinese counterpart to elm. It was doing perfectly fine until last October when we had those hurricanes with many inches of rain over a short period of time. It defoliated quite quickly after that. At that point, it wasn't really possible to tell what it would do this year. It started leafing out normally, and about a week ago started doing what it's continuing to do today. So we don't think there's any saving it. You notice there's some significant cracks in the bottom of the trunk. And so, I point this out so when you come back and see, oh, those awful people at the Arboretum have cut down another tree. A good friend of mine calls me he who cuts down hollies.
Oh,
but,
you're the one.
Yes, I'm the one. Sometimes on the back of a label there's an accession number which would indicate the year.
This garden didn't exist in 2003.
Okay.
Have to hold it in the right orientation. The accession number starts with 03, so that would be 2003. So that was when the plant was acquired, not necessarily when it was planted, but probably sometime shortly after that. And actually I misspoke, it's Zelkova serrata and not sinensis, and it's the cultivar Schmidt, like the good German family name Schmidt, and then L-O-W, and the registered name, as opposed to the cultivar name, is wireless. I don't know what distinguishes this cultivar from a straight Japanese Zelkova.
Originally, it was supposed to be low enough growing that it could grow under electric wires.
Oh, okay. Did everybody hear that answer? It was supposed to be low enough growing so it could grow under electrical wires. That's why the registered name is wireless. If you all can hear me, we have talked about renovating this area, and with the death of the biggest tree in this area, it gives us a greater impetus to renovate this area. We're just in the thinking stage at this point. I'm sorry, I thought somebody said something. This gardenia is an interesting one with the bright yellow foliage, but it tends to burn in late winter, early spring. These brown leaves were fine until late spring, and with the loss of the shade of the Zelkova, it might burn even better, so we might have to relocate that. There's these huge rivers of foliage of leucojum. I'm sure you've all seen it in bloom. The foliage looks just like daffodil foliage, but instead of one or a small number of flowers up on top of the scape, it's a bunch of these little white bells. And they're just as pretty as can be in bloom, but I don't know, the foliage is kind of dreary for a long time, so maybe we'll have less of those. Maybe, well, they've also been planted for a decade or more, I think, so they might benefit from being thinned out. But the Arboretum is about evaluating the plants that we plant, not planting them and then they're there for the rest of eternity. So we'll be evaluating every plant in here and deciding what its future might be, whether it stays or whether it goes. This Manfreda, the Manfreda are like herbaceous relatives of agaves. When we go up on the rooftop, we'll see lots of hybrids between Manfredas and agaves. It's the reason there's so much of it. It spreads underground. I always think a plant has to earn its keep. Spreading plants can earn their keep if they, have merits that, that earn their ability to take up as much room. But I don't know, the Manfreda is a little bit dull most of the year, and then it's gone in the winter. This is such a highly visible spot. We have a lot of people who come to the garden for events, for meetings or whatever in this building who aren't necessarily gardeners. But I think this spot, more than most other spots in the garden, should really be one that really wows people. And maybe get the person who's not interested in plants slightly more interested in plants. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on what they think are the real strong points or weak points of this garden, of this particular area. Not just this bed, but continuing up here. We've made several renovations here this winter. There was that great big viburnum with the small leaves. There was what is that viburnum? Like Raulston hardy, what is that species? It's a Florida native.
Yeah. Escaping me.
Yeah. And it's a great big thing with little leaves like the boxwood leaf. It bloomed for a fairly long period of time, but it was also spreading strongly underground, and I think there's value in spreading plants, but for the average modest size or smaller home garden, spreading plants are a little bit difficult to use. And so our wonderful volunteers dug it out, and I'm going to go over here and point out a brand new plant. Probably most of you are aware that Dr. Denny Werner has introduced many new redbud cultivars. This is one that it's been released to the nursery trade this year. It won't be available for sale until spring of next year, and then in limited quantities. This is one called Golden Falls. It's a weeping redbud with yellow foliage. It's the first weeping redbud with yellow foliage. And redbuds are generally not rooted successfully, so they are grafted, more specifically a type of grafting called budding, where they just take an individual bud and put it on the understock. The graft union on this one is down here. And so when this arrived, it had no branches because every branch was cut off because the nursery industry wanted every single bud so they could increase the, have that many more buds to start plants. And so about 3 weeks ago, it had been planted for maybe about a month before it started to put out new growth, and maybe about 3 weeks ago it finally started putting out new growth, so we were very happy that day when we saw the new growth.
Does it have the standard redbud pink flowers?
Yes, it's sort of that purpley pink color. This redbud up here is another one of Denny Werner's. It's one called Pink Pom Pom with double flowers. It's sort of an interesting thing. If you're into eating redbud flowers, I guess you get more miles for your money by eating double flowers. They are edible. They're not any more interesting than iceberg lettuce or something than that. This little spirea we moved from back behind the yurt. It leafed out really early in the year, like maybe February, and I saw it from a distance, and it looked like a red azalea in bloom. The foliage was bright red, completely covered in bright red foliage. And this is not one of Denny Werner's introductions, but Tom Rainey's, another plant breeder here at NC State. And it's in a series called Double Play, and this one is Double Play Candy Corn. I've not lived with it through a whole summer. Obviously it's not the bright red it was for 2 months earlier this year, but it's still colorful. Any questions on this before we move on? Okay. And the spireas are really tough shrubs. You know, you plant them, probably the only thing they wouldn't like, well, I wouldn't plant them in heavy shade, especially the ones with colorful foliage, because then the foliage would tend to be more green. And I wouldn't plant them in a soggy spot, but beyond that, generally you plant them and they're there forever. And though I always hate to say it, but in my experience, deer don't eat spireas. All right, someone in the audience is going to raise their hand and say they eat them in their garden.
Marilyn's not here.
Marilyn's not here.
Marilyn is not
Maybe
here.
She's coming this evening. All right, we're going to... Ruby Falls was another one of Dr. Werner's introductions. Of course, the new redbud that I'm most excited, we don't have planted in the garden yet because I haven't figured out a really good spot for it. You know, this time of year it looks more like another burgundy foliage one, and the new one's name is Flamethrower. We saw it all last summer because one of our nursery areas behind the scenes is right next to where Denny Werner has some of his plants. So all summer long we saw this plant. And it's one of those rare hardy plants where the foliage isn't burgundy, it's orange all summer. And part of the reason why I haven't found a good spot, I want to put it in a spot where at least part of the day it's backlit by sun, because like stained glass, it's all that much brighter when it's backlit by the sun. But it's a typical redbud growth habit, you know, the upright small tree, but the color is phenomenal. The photos I've seen of it that are sort of out there in the, you know, nursery industry world don't show the color really accurately, but it's a really beautiful orange. I wanted to take you to see this. You know, every gardener always says, well, you should have seen it last week, right? And one thing I wondered, and it did turn out to be the case, at this early in the morning, the Delosperma, the ice plant flowers aren't open. So try to remember on your way out, another hour and a half of sun, and all these flowers be fully open, like that Allen's apricot back there. The flowering lawn was planted last October. I guess the idea that if you had to have a really low planting as a lawn substitute, there are lots of little flowering plants that fit that bill. Having been planted in October, it hasn't gone through a summer yet, so summer's always, I think, the trying time for new plantings. I'm not sure a juga with the little blue spikes out at the edge there is going to be overly happy in full sun all day, but time will tell. Some of the plants are proven performers. This ice plant is Delosperma. The ice plants are Delosperma. This one is Delosperma cooperi. And these actually came from a member's garden who's thinning out their stand. It's one that's been a good performer for, you know, many decades. It's one of the first of the ice plants that became available. But there's a lot of breeding going on in ice plants. This pale, I'll go back there. This pale one is Allen's apricot. it's been a nice one. And then there's another, well, this one back here is a series called Granita, like the Italian word for, I guess, like sorbet or sherbet. And this is Granita raspberry.
Are ice plants native to the southeast?
No,
I didn't think so.
no. I think they're I know at least some of them are South African. Anybody know more definitely than I do? I think they're native to South Africa.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's a big genus. Some of them aren't winter hardy, but there are many that are. There are many that are hardy at the Denver Botanical.
Are you going to augment the watering with this, or are you going to leave it be natural?
This area does not have an irrigation system, which is not a complete answer to your question. It's like most parts of the Arboretum, it's once they're established, we'll sink or swim, see how they do. We're mostly looking for plants of this stature that will tolerate these growing conditions. Some of the big patches of thyme were from the rose garden and had already gone through several winters, several growing seasons or years. And so, they perform well there. The creeping phlox is a native, a southeast native, and these came out of the color trials. Part of the color trials nowadays includes perennials, and they evaluate them over 2 years, and so their time was up, and so we reused them. There are a lot of little bulbs, mostly thanks to a donation from Brent and Becky's bulbs, and they're going by, so being little bulbs, the foliage isn't as voluminous as the leucogens over on that hillside, but still, they're add a slight untidiness to the garden, but just sort of overlook it right now. And we'll tuck in other things. It was just planted in October. I'm expecting most of these things to spread and make solid masses over the course of this summer. If anybody wants to volunteer to be the keeper of this garden, it's, as you imagine, a lot of hand weeding, because the plants are small enough that it's real easy for other bigger weeds to grow up through them. Any questions on it?
Why is the limelight Zelkova doing so well? And that one died. On the point over by
The Zelkova?
Yeah, that one's doing.
Yeah, and there's one out in the parking lot, which, well, from here, if you can see the Woe Nelly holly with the bright yellow foliage, immediately to its right is another
So funny that it
Zelkova.
would take one to.
Well, if you threw three of us, if there's three in this group who can't swim, and you threw us in the middle of the ocean, we probably wouldn't all drown at the very same moment. And so, I'm not being too facetious. Thank you.
Well, I can swim.
I think in an instant, we lost other things in those big downpours. Sometimes, and that Zelkova over in that location, I have to think the soil is highly compromised since there is so much construction around it. All three of the Zelkovas, we'll walk past that one, and that one over there are on slopes, and that can make a big difference in a situation like that, because one of the other plants that I remember we lost last October in those storms was Magnolia labifolia, which is an evergreen Chinese magnolia, and we have, not only was it the same species, it was the exact same cultivar, Gale's favorite. The one out in Oak Grove, which is just the big planted area next to the color trials, that one drowned. That area is level, but the second planted Gale's favorite on the steep slope in Asian Valley came through that wet spell. So, you know, when you have a saturated situation in the soil of a limited duration but long enough to kill some things probably just hang on long enough that they don't drown. So I wasn't being just stupid by saying, you know, if you threw 3 people in the ocean, not all of them would drown at the exact same moment. I think they're sort of probably touch and go until the situation is resolved. And you know, we all know that plants produce oxygen, but a lot of us don't know that plants also need oxygen. Roots need oxygen to respire, and what happens when soil is saturated, the water forces all the air out of the air spaces in the soil, and so the roots don't have any oxygen, and so they suffocate. Any questions on this? We've been pretty happy with its progress thus far. We'll see how summer treats some things, and if things don't make it, we'll fill in with other things. I bought this wonderful little lobelia. Lobelia is cardinal flower, but this is Lobelia chinensis. The foliage is about this tall. It's a little creeper with little pink flowers. And so I think it's going to go up in that spot where the time, a different time, didn't do too well. Alrighty. There's been a lot in bloom in this part of the garden. The scree. If you'll sort of come out of the beds and stand on the walk, getting a little less clear where the beds are and where the walks are. The walks are the tan gravel, but the gray gravel and the gray permatil gravel is migrating outwards. I don't know if anybody has specific questions about plants in this area. We're really just on our way up to the roof. This is the little chocolate flower. Oh yeah, yeah. Smell it and pass it around.
Oh wow!
Does
Can
it
we
smell
eat
like
it?
chocolate? Can you eat it? Only after everyone else has heard it.
I can eat it first.
Like the calicanthus smell?
Does calicanthus smell?
Yeah. Doesn't it smell like chocolate to you? I mean,
No, I didn't know that. Or are you thinking akebia? Akebia is chocolate vine.
Okay.
Did you get
Everybody down here smell this. Let's pass
Anybody?
these up here so there's.
Anybody knows about it?
Oh, I'm sorry. The little morning glory relative is pretty this time of day. Various pencils and stuff. We'll continue up
a little?
to the rooftop.
I have a question.
Yeah,
This is spurge.
yeah.
Is it native or is it a special one?
I don't think that one's a native.
I dug some that look very similar to
Oh.
this in foliage on the roadsides in West Virginia and
Yeah.
dragged it home.
Yeah.
And it's doing great.
Yeah.
I figured it's the native one.
No, I doubt it's a native. It's probably the one that's called graveyard spurge. It looks very much like that. Foliage probably even narrower and generally a little bit shorter, though in a milder climate like West Virginia it might be grown more luscious. But it spreads real quickly.
It's all over the sides of the roads.
Yeah,
and I
it
thought
spreads
was
real
cool.
quickly.
Oh.
You know, I think
I
there's
figured
value.
it was wild, but it looks wild.
Well, people often assume when they see lots and lots of stuff along the roadside that it's a native. Like most people assume that Chinese wisteria, which is the one and only wisteria you ever see along the roadside, is a native.
It's just a,
But we do have 2 or 3 species of native wisteria, but I've never seen them. And they don't bloom at the same time. They bloom after they put out foliage. But the ones that you see everywhere, and this year was an incredible season for the naturalized Asian wisterias because we didn't have a frost destroyed the flower buds that happened most years. Years ago, somebody wanted me to advise them on planting natives around their church, and they said, natives like camellias and crepe myrtles and stuff. So some people tend to assume if you see something everywhere, it's native, but often they're not. Any questions?
What are those pink stalk flowers
The pink flowers?
Uh-huh.
It's a penstemon, a beard tongue.
Oh, what? Beard
Penstemon.
pencil.
Yeah. We have some common native penstemons, by which I mean native to the southeast. But this is a species probably I think is a hybrid, but there are a much larger number of species of penstemons native to
Southeast.
the Midwest.
Oh, Midwest.
Yeah, and a lot of those are species that don't like our hot, humid summers, but we're able to grow some of them, and we'll see one up on the rooftop if they have really good drainage. Okay? Yeah.
A dumb question, but totally off topic. Since fruits come from flowers typically, why does a fig come out? I usually see the fruit before I see even foliage or anything. Is there a really miniature flower that I'm missing? Or?
The fruit is a fascinating thing. The flowers are inside the fruit. When you open up a fruit and there's all those little, you see all the little seeds inside, and most of the figs we grow produce fruit without pollination, but some varieties need pollination, and it's a tiny little wasp. If my fingers here are the fruit, the fig, the wasp goes inside and pollinates inside. It's sort of like a strawberry turned inside out. And whereas and strawberries are a curious thing as well. It's not one fruit. Each of those little things we call a seed is actually a fruit on a tomato, on a strawberry, and the luscious red part is just the receptacle, the part that supports all those individual flowers. So on a fig, you never see flowers because they're inside the fruit. And if you have an early crop of figs, well then some varieties of figs retain little green figs all winter, and they will, once warm weather comes here, they'll develop into full-size mature figs. So if you get a real early crop, it's one of those varieties. They're called Briba, I think sounds like maybe an Italian name for those little green figs that overwinter and give us an early crop of figs. But the flowers are inside the fruit.
Great question.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. One of our goals in the Arboretum is to have more plants, less gravel, less mulch. It's so when you go through the Arboretum, you're not looking at mulch or gravel, you're looking at plants. And we did a lot of planting up here last year, but we're far from where I want to be, where it's really lush with plants. And so many of the things we planted last year turned out to be tiny little things. Tony Avon, grows. He and his crew grow a huge number of things from seed from all around the world. We do too, but he was growing a lot of things for his crevice gardens, and so some of and a lot of the things were of questionable hardiness, but a lot of things came through the winter. But when this is mature size on them, they don't make that much of an impact up on the rooftop. Now this little guy bloomed already. It bloomed a month or more ago. It's closely related to a lot of the succulents that are grown as houseplants. There's an aloe over here that survived the winter. Most aloes don't. The aloe eglonus. They sort of disappear in the winter and then they're coming back, so we're excited about that. Some of the plants that produce a lot of color up here are things that seed around. This is a dianthus. It's actually called Dianthus giganteus, which is, no, I can imagine they called it that because it's tall compared to a lot of the little rock garden Dianthus, but I'm not sure I would have named it giganteus. Down below, when we were looking at the dying Zelkova, I pointed out a Manfreda, and I said there are a lot of hybrids between Manfreda and agaves, and these are multiple examples of different mangaves, which is the made-up name combining parts of both generic names. Most of them are not winter hardy, so they're real easy container plants in the summer because they don't require that you go out and water them once a day. Some are small growing, others get quite large. Most of ours are young enough that we haven't seen them get full size yet. Tony Aben is doing some breeding. The person doing most of the breeding is Hans Hansen from Walter's Garden in Michigan. It would seem highly possible to breed winter hardy mangaves, winter hardy in zone 7, not zone 5, because just choose there's a Manfreda that's native to the southeast, Manfreda virginica or virginiana, telling you that it's from Virginia or thereabouts. And then there are obviously agaves that are winter hardy. There's many examples up here and down in the southwest garden. So if you choose hardy parents, you could end up with hardy mangaves. I guess the main reason to hybridize them is that no agave have spots. So by using the Manfreda parent, you can introduce this new coloration and markings into the hybrids. This big one back here is not a mangave. That's a 100% agave, but that's a tender one. Agaves vary from being winter hardy in zone 7 or a few of them even colder, but there are a lot of tropical agaves that don't tolerate freezing temperatures. Okay. We have quite a few cactus in the rooftop and some down below as well. Again, a lot of cactus aren't winter hardy here, but some are. And like the ice plants, the flowers haven't quite woken up, but this nodocactus is one that has had quite a few flowers. Any questions on that? And this agave is blooming, as you can see. Did you all notice the agave down in the parking lot with the huge asparagus stalk coming out of it? Agave yucca relative, the Hesper aloe. Hesper usually refers to evening, so I don't know whether the flowers appear to be open now, but maybe some other species only opens in the evening times. Common name is sometimes red yucca because of the color of the flowers. Easy plant, blooms for months and months, and hummingbirds love it. Each skate will continue in bloom for a long time. This species is Hesper aloe. Lord, I'm forgetting it. This might be campanulata. Yeah, this is campanulata, which is not as common as the other one, but it's a very similar species. Parviflora might be the other one. Is that right? Yeah, Chris is saying that he thinks that's right. Sea kale it's related to kale, so it's in the mustard family with all the cole crops. Broccoli, cabbages, that whole range of plants. Here we're growing it as an ornamental for its showy foliage. Sea kale, because where it's native in Europe, it occurs on sand dunes at the coast. But it is edible, but I ask you to not eat it. There were a couple other little guys, but maybe they didn't make it. It'll have a big spike of white flowers. The company has always donated it to us, bulk, by the dump truck load. When Tony Avent was at the state fairgrounds, which was his job before he went full-time with his nursery, and the Arboretum were probably two of the first places to use permatill as a soil amendment and promote the fact that they felt there was great value in it. So they've always been really supportive of the Arboretum and have donated permatill. Does everybody know what I'm talking about when I say permatill? It's this gray gravel you see so much of it in the garden. I always forget whether it's shale or slate that was slate. Thanks. That was, like Rice Krispies puffed at really high temperatures. So it's quite a bit lighter than straight gravel. One thing I learned about it recently is that it has a high pH, and I think with our clay soils, the fact that it has a high pH has somewhat the same reaction as adding lime to a soil. And we think of lime as solely raising the pH of the soil. It does, but it does so much more. And clay soil develops better drainage when you make it less acid, and that's what lime does. But also the permatill not only is providing drainage because it's a gravel, but I think because it's a high pH, it's making an acid clay soil less acid, so then the clay particles tend to lump up and develop better drainage.
This looks like 100% permatill. There's actually soil mixed in with this.
Oh, where's Tim when I need him? On the rooftop in various beds, I've only been in this job for 18 months. I've been a volunteer here since the mid-'80s. But I wasn't involved with this garden until I became an employee here. So Tim has told me that the various beds up here have different recipes of mixes. And so I don't know. I'm sure there's some soil in here.
It looks like there's sand under this one.
Well, sand is an ingredient in some of the mixes, yeah. And, Tony Avent at Plant Delights has all sorts of various kind of media in his crevice garden, including some where it's straight gypsum, just the ground up gypsum that you might add to clay soil, and some plants grow in that. The little plants are tiny little things when they're planted, and we have to keep them watered until they're established, but I'm sure eventually their roots go down quite far. I always hate being asked what's my favorite plant today or in the garden or favorite plant of all, but I can't tell you how happy I am to have this foxglove looking this well. This is not Digitalis purpurea, the common foxglove. This is Digitalis thapsi, which is spelled Thapsi. I tried to find out yesterday the derivation of that. I suspect it's named after somebody whose family name is Thap, Thap. It was named by Linnaeus, so that's many centuries ago that it was named, and its common name is the Spanish foxglove. Even centuries ago in gardens, they noted that over time it looks less and less like the Spanish foxglove and more like the common foxglove, and I'm sure that's only because the two will hybridize. And I don't know, maybe this is a one-off and this is the only year this is ever going to look good, but the common foxglove is easy enough to grow, but just when it's approaching this state, it develops huge case of spider mites, and the plants look awful, and you rip them out of the ground, and you know, that's the last of them. But and this species is also supposed to be perennial, not a biennial. I'm always have to keep myself from saying to somebody who's walking out of a garden center with a foxglove in full bloom, probably taking it home thinking, oh, this is going to be beautiful all summer long, whereas they're buying it at its peak, and that's the best it's going to look for forever.
What was the full name of this one?
The foxgloves are digitalis,
Yeah.
and it's Thapsi, Thapsi. Thaps. I don't know how to pronounce it. Thapsi, the Spanish foxglove. So hopefully it'll set a bunch of seed and we'll start a bunch of plants. It doesn't have to be out in full sun all day, but it is more of a sun lover than the common foxglove. The lavender colored flowers are a wallflower. The wallflowers, as a common name, applied to several related genera. This is in the genus Erysimum, and it's an old garden hybrid. It's sterile, so it's propagated by stem cuttings, called Bowles mauve or mauve. I don't know how to pronounce that word. And Bowles, E.A. Bowles, was an English garden writer in the early 20th century, so it's been around for a while. Best time to plant it is in the fall. These were little, 3-inch pots planted last fall, and they just bloom for months. It is short-lived. They often don't survive the summer, but you get months and months of bloom out of them by planting them in the fall.
Do they reseed or?
No, it's
You said
sterile.
they're sterile.
It's sterile. There are wallflowers you can grow from seed, but they're generally in a related genus,
So will you take
Chiranthus.
cuttings of these before they?
Yeah, we do. There are a number of, this is the type of plant that would be considered a subshrub, which is a slightly confusing name. They're sort of shrubby, but they're not permanent stems and stuff. Yeah, but we'll take some cuttings, or some growers in this area grow them. I'll mention the nursery. It's Campbell Road. They have them most falls. They donated a bunch of plants to us, and it's part of the reason why we have them. We saw a penstemon, we saw a similar penstemon, maybe even the same one down below. If you come around this way, there's another little penstemon pinifolius, which I guess might mean leaf like a pine needle, with really narrow foliage. And this is one native to, the Rocky Mountains and such. But it does grow for us if it has really good drainage.
Can you tell me what this blue plant is?
Oh, sure. I'm always happy to have questions like that. It's the plant with the blue flowers is a salvia. Salvias there are the sages. The culinary sage is one species of salvia. That's Salvia comedrioides. There might be a label somewhere here that would save me from having to spell it. It blooms all summer. Did you find it? Yeah. It blooms all summer. This is about as big as it gets. We didn't get around to cutting it back in late winter, so you see some nasty bits here. It's a sort of a little shrub, and we don't cut it to the ground in late winter, but we cut it back by about half, so you get rid of all these little dead tips up on the top, which is just the way the plant grows. It's not a matter of being healthy or not. It's a matter we didn't get around to tidying it up, so now it looks untidy.
What about this beautiful little
Beautiful what? Oh, that's a poppy.
a pumpkin?
Yeah, that's. Oh, what it? I think that's what. That there's a. Yeah, there's a single orange one that seeds all over the place here, and that I think we call it Apiver pilosa. I don't remember. But there's a little orange single one that might be the same species that is really more of a winter annual. It comes up in the fall, grows all winter, blooms now, and sets seeds and then dies. There's several other Delospermas, the ice plants up here. There's a real pretty orange one right over there. This garden was completely redone early this year. If you remember what it looked like before, you can understand Mark's name for the garden that preceded this one. He called it the chocolate chip garden. It's so like a mounded up chocolate chip cookie that hadn't spread out quite as far as you want, and it had these mismatched boulders just sort of dropped in, like chocolate chips in a cookie. So we were able to redo it. The stonework is by Jeremy Schmidt. He's employed by Plant Delight's Nursery, and when you go there and you see beautiful stonework, it's most likely Jeremy's handiwork. The garden, both the one that preceded this and this one, is meant primarily to display the dwarfest of conifers. So most of these are really teeny tiny things. And some of them, they were planted, I don't know, February. So they'll take up a lot more room, but in the years it'll take to fill up the space, we're filling in the spaces in between with the other plants.
Is that little ginkgo on the top, miniature?
Yeah,
Really?
it's the cultivar name is Munchkin. Yeah, and ginkgos. Are ginkgos conifers or just close relatives of conifers?
I think they're considered a conifer,
Yeah,
at least a gymnosperm.
yeah. Well, okay, dwarf gymnosperms.
Thank you.
Sure. And we're not done planting yet. The bottom edge will get around to planting them. It's been a real busy couple months with the plant sale and then the garden party. So we hope to get a bunch more planted in the near future. The little iris was really fun because the flower was almost as big as the foliage. And that's something we raised from seed last year. Iris pumila. The little candy tuft is one I didn't know. It's one we raised from seed. The candy tufts are iberis. It's Iberis simplex. It's been fun. When they first start to bloom, the flowers are white and then they turn lavender.
Is that a perennial?
The local chapter of the North American Rock Garden Society had their monthly meeting this past Saturday, and their guest speaker was an expert on rock garden plants. And she said it would last a few years. I suspect it'll make a lot of seeds, so there'll probably be seedlings coming up here and there, or we'll start some more from seed. It's been blooming for a long time, so it's earning its keep. Any questions on any of that? We have a number of ferns in here. There's one sort of right in front of the tripod of the camera there, but this is a little one that Plant Delight sells. Sometimes the scientific names are a little bit, they're not always super easy. This is Bomaria, and there's two other genera named Bomaria, but they're all spelled differently, and I'm sure they're all spelled named after people's family names. This one is Bommeria, and then you have Boeh Maria. So I wouldn't know which one somebody was talking about if all I'm doing is hearing the word. But it's a little one, and there are ferns, especially a lot of the little rock ferns. This one is over here, and we'll add others. But there are little rock ferns that want to be out in the sun that most people are surprised to see that. Found the last weed in the Arboretum.
Get a prize.
Weeding crews would be glad to hear that.
Oh, okay.
A quick little internet search said that ginkgos are gymnosperms and are more closely related to cycads.
Oh,
and are
okay.
not conifers.
Well, maybe we should put some cycads in here.
Interesting.
There you go.
Very interesting.
This is the first I've seen this open. This is an evening primrose and Enithera, and not all the evening primroses bloom in the evening. Our local native Enithera fruticosa, the sun drops, and blooms through the day, but a lot of them do open in the evening and then fade this time of day. So usually I see it at this stage. Yesterday's spent flower. Big sort of dandelion-like leaves. I didn't know would get quite that big when we planted it.
It risks being dug up from the ground.
Yes. Any questions on any of this? We'll see how these dwarf conifers fare over the first summer. A few of them are from the previous garden, but most of them are new additions.
Everything here is dwarf.
Yeah, very. They are some of the smallest of the dwarf conifers. There was a question about this tree, and I'm happy to point it out. It's a species of euonymus. I think we have there's more than one, but there aren't many euonymus that are native to North America, at least in the east. Hearts of busting euonymus americanus is a gangly little shrub. It's charming in fruit in the fall, but it's a slender little thing that doesn't amount to too much. But a lot of the euonymus native to other parts of the world, and this is an Asian one, become fairly good-sized small trees. This is this plant right here. Little bark. Yeah, it's euonymus bungiana, native to China and Korea. There's another euonymus out in the parking lot that has really gorgeous fall color every year. I don't think we've ever seen fruit on this, but it could be that we have just one plant and they're self-sterile.
Is it invasive like some of the other euonymus?
Well, we haven't had any fruit, so there wouldn't be any seedlings. And some of the other euonymus, the ones that are common in the nursery trade are evergreen shrubs, and some of them spread by, creeping along. But I don't know that any of these are invasive.
What about this bush over here? Does it? Does it grow?
Which bush?
Oh.
Gorgeous. This is spiderwort. Wort is just an old English word for plant. The genus is Tradescantia, named for the Tradescants. What to say about it? It's beautiful now, and it'll be beautiful all morning. The Tradescantia flowers are like so many blue flowers. They only last for the morning. They bloom for an extended period of time. some of them produce so many seedlings that we're trying to eliminate them from parts of the garden. So, but if you have room in your garden for things that seed around, it's a worthwhile plant. It'll bloom for a long period, and then when it gets, maybe about, I don't know, late June, early July, if it starts to look shabby, just cut it to the ground and it'll regrow and start blooming again. I can't be sure which species that is, because here in the garden where we've grown several different ones, they could be hybrids.
It will tolerate this much shade.
Well, this will get our native spiderworts will grow in a bright shade. They're also will grow out in full sun. Okay. A lot of the plants in the genus Stratoscantia are tropical. Things like wandering Jew, the houseplant, is a Stratoscantia. Okay. The Dicolystemas, I know it's a dreadful name. These are native to the Pacific Northwest. And this red one down here, the scientific name is Dicolystema idemei. Well, idemei was a little girl whose father ran the train station in town. There were botanists coming through looking for plants, and she said, "Mister, you want to see these pretty plants behind the train station?" And it was this plant, so they named it after her, Dicolystema idemei. And these are available from the mail order nurseries that sell bulbs, and they're generally sold in the fall. And I highly recommend them because they're blooming at sort of this gap season when spring's sort of waning and summer's not started, and they bloom for a long period of time. And they're getting better every year. These were planted years ago. And I don't, off the top of my head, remember what this pink form is called, but you'll see it in the catalog. And it's pretty veining through it. It's Aristolochia, which means well-born. And one of the common names for the Aristolochia is birthwort because it was used to ease childbirth. Another common name for some of them is Dutchman's pipe because the flower looks like a meerschaum pipe, the one that wasn't straight but came down and went back up and then had a sort of like the trumpet at the flare. We have a native butterfly, one of the swallowtails, called pipevine swallowtail, which is yet another common name for this plant, pipevine. And I've been worried about them because I hadn't seen, actually here's one right here. Chris, did you plant this one?
Yes.
Yeah, here's a pipevine swallowtail caterpillar. And I don't know, they seem like they're off to a slow start this year, but there are times, you see how much of the pipevine there is. It seeds around some. And this one actually isn't a vine, it doesn't climb, and each plant only covers about that much ground. But there are times over the warm months of the year when you won't find any foliage of this out here because the pipevine caterpillars have eaten all of it. It's a lovely little ornamental plant, but we're also happy to have it feed the pipevine swallowtail. Aristolochia, though, has been used medicinally, is like a lot of medicinal plants, is also poisonous, but if you pass it around, you see it has a very acrid smell. But I would recommend planting some in your garden just to support the pipevine swallowtails. It's one of the big black swallowtails. The males have a lot of blue on the lower pair of wings.
And will they make their chrysalises on other things that are growing around the...
I don't remember if I've seen their chrysalis. They probably just travel a short distance here and lay them. And there's multiple broods over the course of the season because there's Aristolochia will flush back out, and then there'll be more caterpillars on them. This species of pipevine is native to the southwest U.S. and Mexico. It is winter hardy, despite having these real slender stems. It makes one tap root. I was surprised when I dug them up. It's like I was harvesting carrots. They're just very much carrot-like, unbranched taproot, and that was pretty much the whole root system on them. We do have several species of Aristolochia native to the southeast. 2 of them are great big vines, and like most vines are a little bit hard to keep under control because they won't just climb, they'll also spread underground and come up. So but there is a little herbaceous perennial that has a rather non-showy flower, but you've probably seen it if you've walked through woodlands. But you can grow them in the garden. There's a pretty iris behind some of you. Oh, okay. I'll put it back and maybe they'll eat it. But I'm going to guess in maybe about a week's time, all the Aristolochia foliage will be gone. Iris setosa is closely related to Iris siberica, and the breeders do hybridize the 2. That's I think it's not a cultivar, but a seed strain called Hokkaido Purple. Because we have multiple plants of it elsewhere, and they're not identical one to the other, but very similar. It's been a great season for peonies. You see a lot of them are completely done already. This one, Garden Lace, is maybe just slightly past its peak. It's really nice that there are modern selections of peonies that stand up. I grew up with Festiva maxima, which is that huge white one with the occasional red petal in it in the center. And they were always flat on the ground. I like so many of the older peonies, so it's nice that breeders are paying attention to something useful like ones that stand up.
I agree.
And peonies, in my experience, are another plant that deer don't eat. Maple, the trunks become real cinnamon colored. It was actually a new acquisition this winter. If you have your choice between bare root trees or balled and burlap, get a bare root tree because you'll end up with more root. This had a fairly small root ball, which meant this was balled and burlap, and it had a fairly small root ball. So instead of getting like the whole root system, we just had what they cut off. Yeah. And so we're going to struggle to keep it alive this summer. Maybe we'll have another wet summer like last year, and it'll be fine. But I carried many a bucket to it last week. I really came through the Japanese garden to just as a way to go into the lath house, and I'm not sure what I might point out in the lath house, but throughout the garden we're trying to get a lot of the blank spots filled in with new plantings, and there are a bunch of new plantings in the Japanese garden when you continue down that way. They're not too much to see right now, but like we're going to renovate this bed. We took down a really ugly, I think it was this odd cultivar cryptomeria, but we can improve the appearance of that bed. We've added a lot of new things to the lath house. They're small things now, but we've also moved out a number of plants. The lath house is not meant to be the permanent home for anything. It's sort of an area to put tiny little treasures that need to be coddled for their first year or several years. Sometimes it's just a matter that they arrive as tiny little plants. You plant them out in the lower 40 and you're going to forget they're there, or somebody stands on them. And so when something's really successful in the lath house, that's a good reason to move it out to the real world and see how it does in the real world, because the soil in the lath house is not really soil, it's permatil and compost and I don't know, is there any dirt to it?
Other good things.
Other good things, yeah. And it's one of the few parts of the Arboretum, the only part of the Arboretum that's irrigated on a regular basis.
Color trials.
Yeah, I guess they do those. Yeah. I knew the color trials have irrigation. I just wasn't remembering if it runs because it's Tuesday.
Well, I think isn't there a weather station that'll...
Those clocks have a rain override. For the most part, we want to see if plants can survive in the real climate that we live in here. But the lath house is a great place to get things off to a good start.
My house is a permanent glass. It's just shady, so whatever's growing in there usually works pretty well.
And we don't, it's sort of, it's real shady right now, but when the sun's directly overhead, it's quite bright, so we don't think of it as being, it's lightly shaded, yeah. No, I wouldn't plant lantana in there, obviously, because, lantana doesn't need to be cosseted, but if lantana's not out in full sun, it gets all stretchy and doesn't bloom much, but you certainly can grow things that need some sun in there. I can understand people being scared of vines, because so many of them are difficult to keep under control. The Asian jasmines, which are not jasmines but are in the genus Trachelospermum, will grow as a ground cover if they don't have anything to climb. I'm not sure, a lot of things won't attach to a metal pole, but Trachelospermum might, but they're beautiful little ground cover. This is a small-leafed yellow foliage one called Kifu Kiraman. We walked past one right over there that has small variegated leaf, and there's a bunch of other cultivars. Out by the visitor center, there's a big mass of a white foliage, white variegated one, and that's Nakafu. Isn't that Nakafu?
Underneath the cinnamomum?
Yeah.
I think that's Nagaba.
You're right. Nagaba. It's a robust one. It's they're very tolerant of dry shade. And then there's one that's widely available in the nursery trade. Usually with the name of Snow in the Summer or something like that. It flushes out white and pink new growth. It's really pretty. Its original name is its Japanese cultivar name.
It's also been called tricolor.
Has it?
Yeah. It's one behind the visitor center.
Yeah.
Towards Live Oaks.
Yeah. All right. Anything anybody wants to ask about? There's an amazing epimedium here. For some reason they named it the Giant, and if you know epimediums in that genus, it is a giant. It was standing upright when it first bloomed. It's about 4 feet tall if you go all the way up to the tip of the flower spike. Its neighbors have been successful enough that we'll need to dig it out, and when we dig it out, it'll be a good opportunity to divide it and spread it around. It looks like the irrigation must have run in here this morning. Everything is freshly moist.
What is this plant?
It's a chlorophytum. Not chlorophytum, chloranthus. So that's the fern. And in this location, you might have seeded there's tons of them in Asian Valley. They're sort of I really like them. Those flowers aren't open yet. They don't get a whole lot showier, but they're small white flowers. But it's sort of a really elegant plant with the glossy foliage and the arrangement of 4 in a whorl, and then the flowers up above it. It's a herbaceous perennial. It disappears in the winter, but it's a great shade plant. It looks fresh all summer.
What's it called again?
Chloranthus. Chlor like Clorox, CHL, Chloranthus. And there's several species of it in Asian Valley. That one, judging by its location, I almost think it might have been a seedling. Of course, the fern also spreads, this maidenhair fern, Maricii. It's a lovely.
What? They don't stop their sign? They don't just go that far and say,
You know, as much as I talk very sternly to these plants and tell them to not grow beyond their label, they still do.
Still do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have that problem.
Don't tell Mark, I'll probably lose my job. Yeah. Okay. Any questions on things in here? Something that I'm really excited about is there are some plants that pretty much are impossible to root. There are this Daphnophyllum. This is the cultivar mountain dove. You know, it has the common name of Japanese Daphnophyllum, so I don't know if that's at all helpful. Probably not. But you know, I grew up gardening because I grew up in a gardening family, and we always had root tone, which is a powdered rooting hormone, and that was the standard industry standard rooting compound forever. You know, a powder, and then somebody decided to make rooting hormones available in a liquid form. And when I was responsible for producing plants for a mail order nursery, there were some things that weren't rooting well with powders, and I don't, you know, this is too many years ago for me to remember why I tried a liquid, but suddenly these things that I wasn't succeeded in rooting with the powder were rooting extremely well with the liquid rooting hormone. Well, now they've gone one step further, and there are rooting hormones that are available as a gel, and people are reporting that they're having high levels of success rooting things that they never rooted before. So, and you know, there are things that you can buy. I don't know if they've shown up in garden centers yet, and you don't need them, the gels, for easy to root things, but for difficult to root things, it's what we'll be using, and I think Chris might be using in the propagation class.
You might experiment.
Yeah. You know, there are a lot of things that when you buy them, like witch hazels and redbuds, that do not root successfully, at least not in high enough percentages. So you're getting a grafted plant. If something happens to the top of the plant, the understock will grow, but you know, that weeping gold leaf redbud, if it dies to the ground, it's going to regrow from the understock, and it's just going to be the wild type redbud. So and same for witch hazels, most witch hazels. So if people could successfully root them and not have to graft them, then, you know, if a redbud died to the ground but managed to put up new growth, it would be the same cultivar as you bought. And that, you know, redbuds, I've known people who love redbuds who still call them dead buds. I think that, our native redbud is, if it's not a grafted plant, you can sort of treat like a large shrub that you cut out an old stem and it puts up new. So I'm hoping that the rooting gels will enable nursery people to, you know, root things rather than graft them.
Apparently, rooting gel gets a page and a half of entries in Amazon. It's available.
Yeah, I don't know what it means to have a page and a half in Amazon. Is that
It means
people
that there's
comment?
a lot of different brands of rooting
Oh,
gel
okay.
available for sale
Okay,
to the public
okay,
through your telephone.
okay. Did you just look it up now?
I did.
Lovely. I left my
I'm
phone
like, I
in.
need that, and so I was like, well, can I get it from Amazon? Because,
Oh, I'm sure you can.
and there's lots of
Yeah.
them out.
Yeah, and I don't remember the name of the brand of the one I was given, but
Either.
we've used it on a few things. Tim, you're not Tim, you're Chris, has informed me that it's 10:30, and So that's usually about the time we give to one of these tours. So thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Doug.
Very
Yeah.